If I am limited to my realism, it is impossible that the world will ever heal. But my realism is an inheritance from a world story that is much narrower than what is really real and possible. And it is, in fact, the precise world story that has created the crisis to begin with. When we open up to a larger causality, to a bigger reality than what modernity says is real, then the situation is no longer hopeless because we have access to all kinds of miracles.
That opening monologue from today's guest is a striking reminder of the world we yearn for. One defined not by separation, but by connection, care, and a shared sense of purpose. These themes lie at the heart of his transformative work, and his ideas challenge us to question the stories that underpin our civilization and to embrace new possibility and new stories for the future. As someone who's deeply inspired by his essays and books such as Sacred Economics and The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible, I'm so looking forward to this. So get ready. We're going deep. We're going really deep. Welcome to Season 9 of The Great Indoors, where we explore the transformative role of storytelling in an era of generative AI. As technology shapes our culture and products, the risk of homogeneity looms large. And this season we'll discuss how embracing unique narratives can counterbalance AI's influence, ensuring our stories retain depth, authenticity, and originality. Join us as we champion the human voice in the digital age. I'm your host, Matthew Roberts, and as ever, I'm joined by the one and only podcast producer, Larissa Yee. Now, today is a huge highlight for me personally. I'm truly honored to welcome Charles Eisenstein to the show. Now, Charles is a hugely influential author and speaker whose work on civilization and human consciousness has captivated me for many years and countless others. You might recognize him from his appearances on Oprah Winfrey's Super Soul Sunday. And take it from me, as someone who's read much of his work, I'm particularly excited to discuss his views on technology as he thoughtfully examines both the pros and cons of technological innovation, particularly generative AI. Now, Charles inspires people to think out of the ordinary, and he will be noted in antiquity as one of the seminal and pioneering storytellers of the new world. So please welcome Charles Eisenstein to The Great Indoors. So welcome to The Great Indoors, back for Season 9. I'm so excited about this episode today. I am really excited to welcome to The Great Indoors. I'm a huge fan. We'll talk about it. I hope I don't gush too much. But Mr. Charles Eisenstein, welcome to The Great Indoors.
Thank you, Matthew. Really happy to be here with you.
Great to have you. Really appreciate the time today. We'll get into things in a second, but where are you in the world today, Charles? Where are you?
Right now I'm in Costa Rica.
Oh, wow.
I live in Rhode Island.
I imagine the weather's a little warmer in Costa Rica right now than Rhode Island.
Yeah, it's very warm, and there's a lot of cicadas. You might hear them in the background.
Yeah.
You hear the noise. Yeah, that's the natural sound, and always here. Hopefully they will agree with what we're talking about.
So let's get into it. I know I announced at the beginning I'm a fan and I'm familiar with your work, but just to give them some background on the sort of central tenets of your writing and some of your books, maybe let's start with Sacred Economics, if we will. I studied economics in my undergraduate days back in England, traditional economics from Adam Smith and Milton Friedman and John Maynard Keynes and all those traditional economists. Then I read Sacred Economics and it completely changed a lot of my thinking. I found it completely enlightening and just a remarkable departure from what I was attuned to with my education. So for our listeners, Charles, could you just give a quick synopsis of Sacred Economics and the central thesis in that writing?
despite the title, it actually does have a lot of economics in it. I wrote it for people like you who are educated in economics, interested in finance, money, or business, and who also are seeking a deeper understanding of money and what it is, what it can be. When you look at any problem in the world and ask, why is this happening? Why are we cutting down the rainforest? Why are we overfishing the oceans? And usually, after a couple levels of inquiry, you get down to money. Fundamentally, money should not have to be that way because money is simply a story that we create that assigns value to symbols. It's a way to connect gifts and needs. It's a way to organize human creativity and labor. So why should that be a bad thing? Why should that cause the opposite? The benefit should come from connecting gifts and needs and organizing human creativity. So I look in that book, I look into what is it about the story that we call money, the set of agreements that we call money that makes it an agent of so much harm. And therefore, how could we change that story to embody the story of money? In some sense, there's nothing wrong with it. It conformed to the values of a growing civilization and the perceptions of individualism, the separate self. And due to the way that it works, it compels endless economic growth, which is the endless conversion of relationships into services and nature into products. As we had a civilizational value of growth and individuation, there was nothing wrong with that. But now we are coming into new values. We no longer seek as a species to be an exception to ecology, to rise above nature and to be the lords and possessors of nature, but to become part of nature, to extend ecology into economy so that they're not at war with each other, to care for the earth, to be participants in the community of all life in a good way. Therefore, we need a money system that embodies different values than the ones embedded in money as we know it. So that's what the book is about. And then I go into specifics about what a new story of money would look like, down to things like taxation and monetary policy and stuff like that.
And essentially the alternative that you propose, and it's extremely logical, is the gift economy, right? Which effectively isn't a new phenomenon or a new idealism. It's something that was prior to a moneyed economy, right? Can you explain to our listeners the notion of the gift economy?
I'm not advocating that as an alternative to the money economy. It's more to infuse some of the qualities of a gift economy into the money economy. For example, in a gift economy, your wealth is not fundamentally separate from my wealth. Because in a gift economy, whoever has a good fortune, whoever is a great hunter, whoever is a talented artist, whoever is a very productive person will share generously what they have. In a very early society, and some societies are still like this today, there was no food storage. There were nomadic hunter-gatherers. So if I killed a wildebeest or something like that, if I were a great hunter and killed a wildebeest or an elephant or something, what am I going to do with all that meat? Well, I'm going to share it generously far and wide. If I suffer some misfortune, if I get injured, if I get sick, or if somebody I love needs help, everybody is going to help me because they have kind of recorded my generosity in an internal ledger. So living in a society like that, a lot of the spiritual principles that seem opposed to money are common sense. As I do unto you, so I do unto myself. So of course, we're not separate. But our current money system makes it look like as long as I have enough money, I'm fine no matter what happens to you. I don't depend on you. I can purchase goods and services from someone else. So I'm not saying, oh, let's abandon money and go back to gifting. That doesn't work in an economy of mass scale and a fine division of labor. We need very sophisticated, complex ways to coordinate the flow of human labor and creativity. So where the book goes is, okay, how do we imbue money with a new story? How do we change its design so that it no longer incentivizes hoarding, so that it encourages flow, so that it encourages generosity, so that it no longer allows one to profit from stripping nature and community of its value, so that it no longer compels endless growth, which is the endless conversion of values to value.
One of our guests in this season, Doug Shapiro, said money flows towards scarcity. I think you argue in the book that the scarcity we perceive is an illusion, which makes us insecure and want to hoard money and accumulate this token of security based on that misperception.
Maybe on some metaphysical level, it's an illusion, but, I'm not going to go telling somebody living in poverty that their scarcity is an illusion. What's more accurate is to say that it's that most of the scarcity that we experience is artificial. For example, there are a lot of hungry people in this world, and we waste about 40% of all food that's produced. More than enough to feed all the world's hungry people. We have hundreds of years of inventions, each one a labor-saving device, yet we still have a scarcity of leisure. We have scarcity of intimacy, of touch. People don't touch each other very much anymore, especially when they're confined to the great indoors. Scarcity of dark nights where you can see all the stars. Scarcity of silence. Scarcity of beauty in the built environment. If you compare 19th century architecture, 18th century architecture with today, if you compare Grand Central Station, which was built 100 years ago or more, to Penn Station in New York, we have a scarcity of water, which is the most abundant substance on the planet. We have an artificial scarcity of money. And none of these things are fundamental. They're due to the way that we have organized ourselves. All the scarcity is artificial. And I guess in the book, I'm also drawing on a deep intuition that it doesn't have to be this way. That if we were able to cooperate with each other, if we were no longer artificially at odds with each other, then we can have tremendous abundance on Earth, which has been promised ever since the beginning of technology. The steam engine could do the work of 1,000 men. So futurists in the 18th century or the 19th century were forecasting the imminent end of labor. And it didn't happen, did it? Why not? This is a basic question that's coming up a lot right now. I mean, all the promise of modernity, from the factory, industry, information technology, that was supposed to save us all that mental labor, the way that the machine saved us physical labor. And it hasn't done it. We still live in a felt experience of scarcity. And so a lot of people, and this is part of the political turbulence that's going on today too, people feel betrayed by our systems, including our economic system, our political system, our industrial system, our technical system. And so I'm speaking to this felt sense that it could be different, and that the key to that difference lies within ourselves and our relationships to each other.
It's amazing, Charles. And it jogged my thinking. Going back 20 years or so, I was in the UK at a company called Vodafone that is mobile technology. And Vodafone branched into Africa. We're coming up with innovation, and mobile penetration in the developing world would increase GDP by 10% for every 10% of mobiles that went into. There were all these statistics and factors that these innovations would increase happiness as measured in monetary terms, would increase our productivity, our utility, everything. But like you said, that hasn't come to pass. I think quite the opposite. And I think this is an opportune moment to get into something that with a lot of your writings, you look at the latest technology. You're a very technology savvy writer, and you look at how that is going to have an implication on humanity and mankind. I was going to South America a couple of years ago to an event in Sao Paulo, and they wanted me to talk about the metaverse. And I remember you wrote an essay on the metaverse at the time that I thought was outstanding as far as replacing all worldly experiences with a digital replication and how harmful that could be. Now, thankfully, the metaverse was a pure hype and it wasn't something that's come to pass just yet. Let's dive straight into generative AI. And my history with it goes back to the days of big data. We can accumulate all this data now and we put it all into these data lakes, and it's going to unlock this next cycle of enlightenment and human advancement. But no one could say what that was. All they could do was guess. We'll know when we see it, right? And then 2 years ago, on the 28th of November, 2023, I think it was it was 22, I think, if I recall. OpenAI released ChatGPT, generative AI came into effect, and that was the use case that all this data effectively looks like it's pointed to. So I'd like to just get your high-level thoughts on generative AI. You wrote a brilliant piece, Machines Will Not Replace Us. You closed that essay with, machines will not replace us. It is not a prediction. It's a declaration. So what's your overarching feeling on generative AI and its effects on humanity?
Yeah, well, that's a very big question. There are certainly a lot of functions that AI and automation in general can replace. And even going back to previous technology, simply computation can and did replace roomfuls of accountants with green eye shades going over physical spreadsheets. I don't think anybody thinks that's a bad thing. I don't think we want to return to a world where you have to add and multiply everything by hand, or where documents are copied by hand by Bartleby the Scrivener. I don't think we want to go back to toll booth collectors sitting all day doing that. There are a lot of functions that can be replaced and maybe should be replaced. The danger and the error comes when we mistake the things that can be replaced for the things that cannot be replaced. Generative AI gives a good impression of creating things that it actually cannot create and that only can be created through a material sensory experience of the world. So I don't know if you've ever everybody's had an experience, maybe not with a full-blown psychopath or malignant narcissist, but with somebody who's really insincere, who has learned it doesn't really feel very much inside, but can give a really good impression of empathy.
Just yesterday, by the way. Yeah, just yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They say all the right things, and they speak about emotions, but they don't actually feel the emotions. They might be able to fool you for a while, but eventually you're going to get a sense of emptiness, like nothing inside there. Well, generative AI can also give a very good impression of feeling things. In one of my essays, I quoted an interaction where the AI uses the phrase, a shudder of recognition. It writes beautifully, uses vivid metaphors and educated turns of phrase, creative turns of phrase to describe emotions that it doesn't actually have. Reminds me a lot of a bullshit artist, really. As long as we're not actually using it for emotional companionship. If we're using it to summarize a document or summarize the state of knowledge on a certain topic, then we're not pretending that it can do something that it cannot do. If we rely on it to do things that it cannot do, then we're in for a lot of grief. So I don't want to discount the power of the technology. A friend of mine said we used to have to read books, and we can still read books, but now we can have a conversation with the book. Essentially, what AI allows us to do is to have a conversation with the totality of recorded human knowledge, or at least a subset of it. That also hints at some of its limitations. Its training data only includes things that have been recorded. But there's a lot of the human experience that has not been recorded because it wasn't deemed important or because it is impossible to record. If we outsource our cognition to AI and rely on it to generate our experiences, then we're going to be missing a huge swath of the human experience and a huge source of information, because information cannot always be reduced to data.
And I think that this is my thinking on this, and I'm still processing this almost every day. You mentioned the Industrial Revolution and the steam engine. Since about the early 80s, everything in our life is being digitalized. In one of your essays, you called it digital hyperabundance, which I think is a wonderful term. Progressively, whether it started with, our music, we started to digitalize, our literature, we digitalized, our banking, we digitalized. We went into COVID and there was a vault forward of digitalization in far as communication, shopping, banking. And I'll give you a really good example with my 7-year-old son. We're doing all our shopping on Amazon. We're not, high streets, for example, in England are all degenerating now because people don't go to the physical shops. This heart of the community has disappeared. And we're ordering whatever we want on Amazon and it turns up the next day. And my son said to me about 6 months ago, he came up to me and he said, "Daddy, is my pirate ship here yet?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Oh, okay. Let me know when it arrives." I went to my wife and I said, "Did you order him something on Amazon?" And she said, "No." I was like, "He thinks the pirate ship is coming." The next day, he came and said, "Is my Sonic the Hedgehog toy arrived yet?" And we said, "No, what are you talking about?" It occurred to me later that evening when my wife said, "We're out of shampoo." And the next day, shampoo arrived. So my son was conditioned to thinking that whatever he thought about turned up the next day automatically, that there wasn't a process of even having to go and select something and buy something. And it made me think he's a digital native 7-year-old. He believes that this is where we are right now. Then I look at generative AI and I've said, "What do you use generative AI for?" And we always have a bit of a laugh. Someone will say, "Oh, I wrote my wife a Valentine's poem. It was much better than I'd do. And I did this and I did that." And one of these great thinkers said, "Well, I use it as a thought partner. It thinks for me now. Cognitive offload." And I thought, whoa. Won't that have a diminutive effect on humanity if we're outsourcing or digitalizing our thinking to this tool?
Yeah, well, that's a really, I would almost say an apocryphal story you told about your son. And in a way, chilling as well, because this obliviousness to the process of creation that is fostered when you just hit Amazon one click and it shows up at your door. And then, your son not even knowing about that step induces a way of thinking and obliviousness to all of the labor and the resources and the effects of our system of production. There's no evidence in your direct experience that the electronic item you ordered is made from plastics, rare earth minerals, and copper that have real effects in the real world on ecology, on beings of nature, on human beings. That's all completely gone. Whereas if you're living in a less modern society, the person who made your shirt, you know how much work it took to grow the rice. The hoe that you used to tend your field, you repaired that last year, and you're more present in the world. To use sacred economics terms, in the flow of giving and receiving. The more that we're immersed in a digital reality, the less present we feel, the less that we even have a sense of existing. That is a deep kind of scarcity, an artificial scarcity, a scarcity of relationships, of intimacy of sense that happens when we replace physical, material, social relationships with electronic relationships. That leaves us hungry for the real thing. And when all that is available to meet that hunger is more of the fake thing, then we become addicted. How much internet porn does it take to meet the need for genuine intimacy? How many conversations with a chatbot does it take to meet the need to be really understood, to be really seen by somebody? It gives an incredibly accurate simulation of relationship, but it's not the real thing. Now, the technological mind would say, well, we will improve it until it becomes indiscernible from the real thing. This carries an assumption that we can simulate the physical world digitally. And it goes to some pretty deep philosophy, about materialism and is the human experience simply the organization of bits of data that come through nerve impulses from our sensory systems? Sensory mechanical metaphors come naturally when you think in this way. But I think that most of us have had experiences that defy that kind of mechanistic explanation. And we have a sense of a connection to source and that feeling of authenticity that comes from a embodied experience. And I think that if we value those things, if we recognize those as real and value them, then we will be able to use Gen AI for its proper purpose. We won't mistake it for being able to meet needs that it can't meet and do things that it cannot do. We'll be able to use it well. It's an incredibly powerful tool. We can have a conversation with all recorded human knowledge. That's really what it's doing. And that is profoundly useful. But yeah, as far as outsourcing, like what your friend was, or you were talking about the person who you interviewed as using AI as a thought partner, I think that could be useful, but it's dangerous. It's dangerous when you let the partner take over the thought.
And I think going back to something else that you've written about a lot that I think is fascinating, and it's absolutely relevant. Whenever we see a human technological advancement in the history of mankind, if it's that profound, it has a physical externality on human evolution and DNA, right? So I think the examples that I've read from you is when man created fire, our jawbones shrunk, our stomach enzymes changed. When man created the written word, our memory capacity diminished from what it was. Not that that's a bad thing, because then we could refocus our cognitive efforts on other things that were deemed progress. Is there a danger with generative AI if we're digitalizing and offloading our thinking, that our mental faculties and acumen will diminish?
Yeah, it will definitely happen. I give the example of GPS. When you get used to using GPS, not only do you not learn your area if you move to a new area, but over time, your ability to learn any area diminishes. That whole way of thinking, that sense of place, that habit of remembering a series of landmarks, like anything you don't use will atrophy. Same like any muscle in the body. If you don't use your muscles, they will atrophy. If you don't use your brain, if you don't use your memory, if you don't use your concentration, those faculties will atrophy. If you keep lists of everything, then you won't remember things as well. If you use AI to write your emails and summarize documents, then the capacity to summarize a document, you have to go through quite a lot of labor. You have to discern what is relevant and what is not relevant. You have to be able to distill the key point from a lot of verbiage. That requires effort. It requires a process of understanding something. So if you never go through that process, the muscle of understanding will atrophy. And The question then is, what new capacities might be made available? Like the example of writing shows that maybe we outsource our memory to the written word, but we certainly gain a lot of new capacities, especially through writing, and new forms of expression, new aesthetics, new forms of beauty. The accumulation of scientific knowledge would not be possible without recording it somehow in ways that are beyond mere oral transmission. Like you can't really do that at scale. Writing allows you to do things at scale. And, I'm not someone who's saying, we should abandon AI, going to destroy our brains and our society. But I do think that we have to really be aware, like I said before, of what it can do and what it can't do, and the perils in relying on it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, there's a price to be paid when you let AI do your thinking for you.
Yeah. And do you think, I can give you an example. There's this discussion of, will it become sentient? At the moment, it's a prediction model. It's giving you an illusion of something. I had a conversation a year ago in Barcelona, and I was meeting all these tech leaders from all the big tech companies. One of them said, AI is only limited by our own imagination, which makes sense, right? The content it produces is based on what's come before it from humans, effectively. I asked another tech leader to give me his thoughts on that statement. He paused and thought about it for a while, and he said to me, no, it's limited by the machine's imagination. And I said, whoa, hold on a minute. It stunned me a little bit. Are you telling me it now has an imagination and it's thinking for itself? And he said, yeah, I've seen it. And I'm not going to name the company. I'll probably get into trouble. And I'm certainly not going to name the individual. But that really made me shudder for a second, because where we are with it right now is very much the language model prediction element. But if it becomes sentient, I don't know.
Okay. So I think that there is a sense in which it is imagining, because it makes internal representations of things. That's maybe what imagination is. The connections that it discovers, the patterns, basically the training process is a process of recognizing and representing patterns in the data set, which could be language, could be images, could be sounds. And so there is definitely a process of thought, or that could be called thought, a series of representations, level after level after level. Sentient, though, interesting word here. It's the same root as sense. And what a machine cannot do, or at least the generative AI that we're familiar with cannot do, is sense. It can receive data, but doesn't have a body. Now, you could, and there are actually, so in robotics, there are sensors gathering data about pressure and facial recognition software. Even like if I touch something, if I were a robot and all of the data that I'm gathering through my senses were put in some database, it would very, very quickly outstrip the size of the training data of the largest AI models, the largest LLMs. The real world is vastly more complex than any of our representations of it. Genuine intelligence has an embodied component. It's not just about the manipulation of data. It's not just about the discovery of the recognition of patterns and their application. When you are only in a world of data, your intelligence starts to become deranged. This happens to people who are on the internet too much. There are all kinds of narratives out there that when you get into one of them, it seems quite logical. And you go down these rabbit holes, flat earth rabbit hole, and for all you know, the earth is flat because you're getting all this information that confirms that belief.
Backed up by facts and figures that they think validates the narrative.
Yeah. Or you could end up believing all kinds of racist narratives, absurdities. If that's all you're relying on, and you have no grounding in physical relational experience, it happens all the time when people are subject to war propaganda, racial propaganda, or anti-immigrant propaganda. I'm not making a political statement here. I don't think immigration is a simple good versus bad issue, but you can get online and be subject to these narratives that demonize some subset of humanity. What is going to shake you out of that? Probably a personal encounter with somebody who is in your category of bad person. Could be they're an immigrant or MAGA person, a right-winger, a left-winger, an Israeli, a Palestinian, whatever your category is of subhuman. The internet alone is not going to disabuse you of that delusion. In a way, humanity itself has become lost in its symbols. This returns us to the money issue. We are doing things that our metric of money says is increasing our well-being. GDP is going up and up and up. On a personal level too, your hedge fund manager could, by his metric of worth, net worth, here's my worth, things getting better and better. But is he actually getting happier with that second billion and that third billion? And is society getting happier? As you mentioned with Vodafone in Africa, are people in Africa happier when traditional village life is replaced by tapping away on a screen? This is universal. When we get disconnected from physicality and from sensing, we go crazy. This happens to people all the time, and it will happen to us collectively. It was already happening, but AI could intensify it if we don't get with more materiality, more embodiment, more physical connection to nature. Yeah.
But that's the notion of your book, The More Beautiful World, right? The notion of this story of separation that we're living in now that's destroying the planet, and we're on this path of destruction, versus the story of interconnectedness, which we need to embrace to basically save humanity. Could generative AI be a force for good in enabling humans to embrace that new story? Could it be a force for good? I think I have made the mistake, and when we've been having this conversation, is to automatically say, why is it a bad thing? Why is it a bad thing? And we talk about the things where it could be productive and help us in our everyday lives. But if we look at the fundamental issues that we face as a species, could generative AI be a force for good in alleviating that?
I think that potentially it is a way to connect us to the, as I said before, the totality of human thought or recorded human thought. And it's a partial subset of it, but still, potentially that's what it can do. It coheres humanity into a single organism. And that process has been going on ever since writing. And there are maybe other ways that don't require conventional physical means to connect with people around the world. However, it is a way to draw humanity together as one. As I said before, you can have a conversation with a book now. You can have a conversation with all books ever written. It does contribute to the knowledge that we are fundamentally not separate from each other. And you have to realize every time that you use generative AI, it is drawing on 1 billion conversations that have happened between human beings. It is channeling the oversoul of humanity, you could even say. Or what aspect of it, okay? Because again, there is an awful lot of information, kinds of information that AI just does not have access to it. It never has shuddered. It only can imitate the metaphors that we use that are grounded in materiality, but it does not have a material experience. So we have to be careful not to project something onto it that it doesn't have. And that will ultimately help us to appreciate and use it well for what it does have and what it can do.
Those lived-in experiences, when we look at this world of digital hyperabundance and automation at scale, it is the last bastion of humanity, right? This is something we need to be aware of. We need to hold on to, that the authenticity, creativity, lived-in experiences of human beings will never be replaced, ever, despite the way technology is advancing. One of our guests said, are we headed to a world like that movie Wall-E, where Earth is destroyed, we're living in space, we're fat, we can't even walk, let alone think, right? That's the future we need to avoid at all costs. And that's why I personally believe this is the last frontier. This is where we have to say the human storytelling, the creativity, the connection can never be replaced, and we should hold on to that.
We need to value it. We need to recognize that it's precious. If we don't value it, then we'll let go of it easily. We don't recognize that it exists and that it is precious, then we're not going to safeguard it. We're not going to insist on it.
Okay, wow. I think the conversation has been fantastic, Charles. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. And this is the TGI Storytime piece, where I'm going to ask you, Charles, to recount a story in your lifetime that had a profound impact on your life and couldn't have been delivered in a digital way. TGI Storytime.
For some reason, I'm thinking of just a very small story that from my grandfather. When he was a child, they were very poor and had chickens. He went to take the eggs to sell. And on his way, he had a bike accident and all the eggs broke. So he had to go home without selling the eggs, and they had no dinner that night. That kind of installed a program that recognized that the comfort and security that was normal for me and ubiquitous was just one of many possible experiences and realities. If I had read that story online somewhere or in a book, sometimes you read stories in a book and they have a profound impact. But the fact that it was about somebody I knew and loved made it land differently. This is something that is lost in the transition from oral storytelling to writing. Because what a written account can never do is put you in a unique relationship and moment with the storyteller. No story can actually be told twice orally. The second time you tell it, it's a different time, a different moment, a different place, a different mood of the teller and the listener. A uniqueness is lost when things are made objective. And writing contributes to this notion that reality is this objective thing outside of ourselves, which is a very Cartesian, Newtonian belief. It's not a belief that indigenous people typically held or hold. And it's incompatible with quantum mechanics as well. Generative AI is subverting the long-standing idea that if there's a photograph of it, then that's objective proof. It used to be pretty hard to fake a photograph. You saw photos, that proved that whatever it is real. Show me the photos of the UFOs landing. Show me the photos of the war victims. Oh, okay. I must believe you now because you showed me photographic evidence. AI has destroyed all of that because it can make a perfect replica, a perfect simulation of photo, video, audio, anything. So it's kind of bringing us back into a world where the only reliable reality is what comes from a direct relationship in a moment. I'm not going to trust something I see online just because of what it depicts. I'm only going to trust it because of the source, because I trust the source, which is just like oral culture. You know, if somebody comes and tells a tale of something they saw on the other side of the mountain, I'm not going to believe them unless I trust them. If this person's a known liar, because what evidence is there besides his report? Well, it's getting like that now again.
I think that's an amazing point, that we're going back to a point where the only stories to believe, not believed, but that we would believe stems from the person who's telling that story, how we view them as an individual, their ability, their veracity, rather than just believe anything we see because the picture never lies or the camera never lies. We're in a world where you have to trust a human individual to truly believe in what it is they're telling you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really ironic that at this very moment of UAP disclosure, where the boundaries of reality are dissolving in front of our eyes, that at this very moment, the technologies that could prove have become obsolete. There's no proof. I mean, a news agency could post video of flying saucers landing on the White House lawn, and you would not know that it was authentic. And there are people out there who believe that, who think that everything that is coming from the government or through the legacy media is fake. Like, how do you know if you're not actually there? Yeah. So the call to step back into materiality and embodiment is getting stronger and stronger.
The final thing we're going to do, as I mentioned at the beginning, is our quick fire round. After such an amazing conversation, it's always a nice way to bring things to a close and for our listeners to understand a little bit more about you. All I do in this round is give you two options and you choose the option based on your preference. It could be that you like both options, or it could be that you have a third option, but it's a nice way to close out. So let's begin. TGI to go. Question number 1, sunrise or sunset?
When I see the sunrise, it's because I've gotten up early and I'm usually in a better frame of mind. And it feels, I just feel like there's not as many people watching it.
Would you rather go running or cycling?
Running.
And you do a lot of running?
I did. My knees have not been as reliable as they used to be. So, but yeah, I was a athlete in college, a runner. Yeah.
But I think running has, I think it increases your mental acuity. When I go running, I do a lot of thinking and a lot of,
I get into deep trances when I run or walk even.
Now, you're in Costa Rica right now. Do you prefer the sun and the warmth or the snow?
I prefer the sun.
So how long have you been in Costa Rica for?
More than a month.
Because Larissa lives up in Boston and it's freezing there right now.
Normally I live in Rhode Island.
Now you're going to eat tonight. You're going to have a nice meal. And I'm going to offer you Chinese food or Indian food. What would be your preference?
That depends. If it's a random restaurant, I would go for Indian. If it's really well done, though, I would go for Chinese.
And you lived in Taiwan for a while,
yes.
Right? Have you visited?
I just visited a couple weeks ago.
Now, and you're going to watch a movie tonight whilst you're having your meal in the sunshine. Would you rather watch a science fiction movie like The Matrix, or would you rather read a novel by Charles Dickens?
Oh, it depends on if I want to veg or if I want to stimulate myself, nourish myself.
I always think, obviously it was just Christmas and I watched A Christmas Carol again, and I was always a fan of, or was forced to read Charles Dickens growing up in England. To me, Charles Dickens, and whether it's Great Expectations, for example, that's an example of the gift economy, Great Expectations, in Victorian industrial England as the catharsis for what was happening, the dream, the more beautiful world in that industrial Victorian dark age. A stranger that came along and because of an act of kindness bestows upon him his opportunity to become who he dreamt of being. I think that's the gift economy right there, right, Charles?
I would say that it's the spirit of the gift. Yeah.
Okay, well, there we go. That's TGI to go. Thank you very much, Charles. I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed the conversation. I can't tell you how fascinating the conversation was, how it leans into everything we're discussing on this season. Are there any final thoughts you would like to impart on our listeners around the world before we sign off today?
Well, I enjoyed the conversation very much and thank everybody for their attention and listening. Maybe just point to the hope and the dread that surrounds new technologies and AI. But there's also a curiosity. We really don't know what the next chapter has in store for us. And so I would, curiosity is kind of a letting go of what we think we know. And I'd like to invite people into that space.
It's been wonderful, Charles. Thank you very much for joining The Great Indoors.
Thank you, Matthew.
Well, there we go. What an episode. One of the best by far. Thank you very much, Charles, for taking the time whilst you're down there in Costa Rica to join us. And I look forward to speaking to you again. Just incredible. Check out all the links to Charles's work in the show notes. You have to follow his Substack to get his essays directly into your inbox, but it's truly worth it. So I'm a little bit blown away. But for all updates on this season and all things The Great Indoors ever since the beginning of time, visit us at amdocs.com/The Great Indoors. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time as we continue exploring the stories and the human touch in the digital age. I'm Matthew Roberts from Amdocs in Toronto. Have a great day wherever you are.